external labor framework. So this is my current crusade. I said, okay, entrepreneurial agents are very important, of course, right? But most of our theories and most of our colleagues look exclusively at agents and what is it about the person that make them act entrepreneurially. So I say, okay, that is important, but we have a lot of theory. I don't need to develop that because there is a lot there as well. Then to the left here, you see what, so external labor is, that is any kind of environmental change. So the thinking here is that anything that disrupts the environment will create opportunity for new business, right? And to the left tab, we have a list of different types of changes: technological, regulatory, demographic, social, cultural, macroeconomic, political, natural, environmental, all of these changes, right? And this we recognize from frameworks like PESTEL and so forth, that we discuss those changes, and yeah, that's worth looking at, right? But it doesn't go much further than that. So what we're trying to do in this framework is to go a bit deeper into what is it about changes that makes them open up opportunity for new business, right? And depending on what kind of change it is, who would be likely to be able to be willing and able to act on it, right? So instead of focusing on types, we look at across those types, and within instances of the same type, they vary in meaningful way, right? So they vary in the type of onset. So is this something that happens very sudden, out of the blue, totally unpredictable, or is it something more predictable? Is it something more gradual? So predictability and suddenness, they're often correlated, but sometimes they're not fully correlated. So that has an implication for who can act on this. A more agile actor can act on a sudden onset, for example. And that is often means a small independent agent, right? To take a tragic example, the terrorist attack in Paris a few years ago, a couple of days later, you have in the street corner someone selling T-shirts with "Je suis Charlie" on them, right? A big corporation doesn't do that. They wouldn't, and they couldn't. They can't act that fast. So that is onset. And at the other extreme, you have extremely gradual onset, like demographic shifts or other shifts that just happen little by little. They may be so slow that it's difficult to react on. And then that may, for example, imply that maybe that is when an industry outsider can better see that, hey, this has now got completely out of line with what the current environment in, rather than the insider who gradually has adapted, but fundamentally may be based on some now obsolete business model or technology or so forth, right? So the onset is one important dimension. The scope of an enabler in spatial, is this something that affects one city, or is it something that affects the whole world? Is it something that is likely to open opportunity for new things for a long duration of time, or is it a very temporal window? Is it something that affects all sectors, or is it something that is for a specific sector? Is it something that affects all kinds of people, or is it something that sort of, this is something that only, this is a regulatory change that affects military veterans, that's all, or preschool children or something like that, right? So you have all this variance, and this affects how many different types of new businesses could be based on this. How attractive is this for a big global actor versus how attractive is it for a small local startup with limited ambitions and so forth, right? Social demographic scope, if it is something that affects a very particular group, some people who are suffering from some kind of medical condition, or people who currently have preschool children or something like that, which is not such a narrow group. But then that may be instances where there would be a lot of user innovation, right? Those that are in that space are the most likely to, whereas if it is something that has very broad scope, that is something that maybe it's beyond an independent startup to benefit, at least from a long run, they may be able to take first steps and hope for being acquired and so forth. So there's a lot of, so this is variance on the level of the enabler itself, right? So that affects what kind of entrepreneurial action might be tried and what might be successful. Then we talk about mechanisms. So these are the specific advantages that particular ventures can derive from a given change. And this is similar to the notion of affordances that starts to pop up in the literature now. So combination, compression, that is, combination is when you leverage something that is already out there at no cost, and then you add your little thing. Like, for example, the electric scooter hire businesses, they leverage the smartphone for payment, for locating the scooters, and all those things, right? So compression is to save time, conservation is to save money and resources, enclosing is to increase the share of the value you create that you can secure for yourself. Then we have resource expansion and demand expansion. Generation is often limited to technological and regulatory enablers. So you can do completely new product or services, or new product or service features that just weren't possible before. Legitimation, substitution, uncertainty reduction. So these are the vocabulary for what can I look for in this change in relation to particular ventures, right? Next step then is the mechanisms have characteristics in themselves, and we talk about agency, intensity, and opacity. So opacity is this something that every person on the street would realize that now this has happened, so yeah, we have a COVID lockdown again, so demand for toilet paper will go up, right? Everyone knows that now. Maybe not in the first way, but some did. So there is difference in opacity. Usually we only talk about this as an agent characteristic. Some have the prior knowledge, some don't, right? But you could also say across the population, how many could possibly come up with, see that this can be used in a particular way and not others. So there is something in the external neighbor, in the mechanism itself, that is sometimes it's meaningful to talk about this variance on that side. And things that have more opacity may be more difficult to identify, but also have greater potential for being protected from competition, right? Same with agency intensity. Some things happen automatically. You don't have to do anything. You for example, you offer a weather dependent product, and the weather turns your way, and you may not even be aware of how lucky you are, right? For some of those windfall things. At the other extreme, you have things that it takes a lot of time and resources to turn a general technology into a viable application in a particular industry. May be a long and expensive journey, right? So riskier, more costly, but also probably a better basis for a sustainable advantage if you can pull it off. So that I think the mechanism here is maybe the core part of using this as a practitioner tool. So what can I look for in those things, right? And this is something where we, compared to the research we've had of sort of opportunity identification, opportunity evaluation, it allows you to go deeper into what is it that they see that is advantageous here. How does this different between an undergraduate novices and entrepreneurial experts and so forth, right? Then we aggregate those mechanisms into roles in the in the uh, in the entrepreneurial process as well. So is this enablement from external change, is that a trigger? Is this something that is one of the important reasons for trying a new startup to begin with, or is it just a little supplement, so to speak? Is it something that is taken on board strategically at the outset of the journey, or is it that something that operates later? So you can have some things that are outcome enhancing, maybe surprisingly outcome enhancing, that wasn't sort of the strategic focus early in the process, but and you have others that were had a big role, a bigger trigger, but in the end didn't turn out to be such a big part of the level of success that were. So I think it's important to distinguish between triggering and outcome enhancing. In the middle of that process, there may be different things this external change is used for. Is it used for shaping the offering, the product or service? I mean, if it is social entrepreneurship in response to a disaster, then that naturally shapes what the product or service will be. There will be some kind of disaster relief in most cases, right? It may be something that shapes the venture, the business model, how you organize the venture, or it can be something that just shapes the process, that makes it. For example, we in our first paper on this, in our paper in ETP about the surge in IT hardware startups, we looked at things like how 3D printing has made the venture development product development process much cheaper and faster, right? And that is a big part in explaining the surge of independent startups in this industry that had been so capital intense, that it now became more viable for independent agents. We recently did a review of past research on what we call external labor. Of course, most of it predates the external labor framework, and often the link isn't made explicitly. Maybe there is some theoretical reasoning about the link, but this is what I really would like to see developed. But usually it's research on one external change, and how that influences the rate of business startups in overall or in a particular industry, right? But I like it, for example, when one of my favorites is a historical study by Hyatt et al. About the temperance movement, which became prohibition in the early 1900s, and how that not only led to the demise of brewers and distilleries, which is the expected effect, but also to a surge in soft drink startups. So this was when Coke and Pepsi came to the fore, but also back then, as is often the case in young industry, there was many of them. And what I like, they had this kind of aggregate data, but they also went into sort of archival data, looking for evidence that this actually was strategically used in the development, and they went beyond the most obvious mechanism, the demand expansion. People need to drink something, right? Maybe more important was resource expansion, that the facilities, machinery, and people who had worked in breweries and distilleries were available at the bargain rate for those who wanted to use it for something else. And that is a general lesson for entrepreneurship, that it would be very difficult to be a de novo startup in this world if all resources were already fully employed elsewhere, right? You have to pay through your nose for everything. So that is one example. One of my favorite studies also is Denis Gregoire's dissertation work. There is a couple of papers in Org Science 2010 and Academy of Management Review, Academy of Management Journal 2012 in particular. So this is experimental work in the opportunity stream. But what he does is he uses real technologies and new, real emerging demands, and he doesn't just take an ad hoc list of opportunity characteristics, but sort of he has those combinations of elements that are more or less obvious how they can be linked and applied. So that is a precursor of our opacity concept here. And they link this to agent theory. It's a cognitive theory about the ability to see structural versus superficial alignment. So superficial alignment is sort of low opacity. Many of us make the link. Structural alignment maybe takes more expertise, and maybe it's something that we should teach in entrepreneurship class. The systematic ability to look for the more structural alignment between potential supply and potential demand. So these are two examples of this. Of course, there are others, but yeah, off the top of my mind, these are some examples. I think, I mean, when I started in entrepreneurship, it was almost non-existent. So I got away with doing anything, jumping between different levels of analysis, different research questions, and so forth. Of course, now in a much more mature field. If I were a person like myself entering now, I would try to enter a young and underdeveloped corner, so to speak, and this is such a corner, and that means that it is a bit risky in the sense that and it's a bit of a challenge because you don't have those very clear role models that this is how you do it, right? But it's also an area that, I mean, we could see in the review we did that there is a surging interest now. The external environment, and especially environmental change, has been neglected in strategy and entrepreneurship for the last few decades. But we can see an emerging surge, but still at relatively low absolute levels. So it is an interesting corner to enter. But it demands more from you than sort of, you want this safe path of a well-trodden path. You have a developed paradigm. You just find your own new moderator that you operationalize, and then you can publish, and very few people get excited about their work, right? Here the span of possible outcomes is wider. Worst case scenario is that your study doesn't work. We're struggling with trying to do some experimental work now, and sort of does the experiment manipulation really work? Do people pay attention to this variance in so that is the worst case scenario. So it's important to pre-test, and if it's experimental, that you have very clear distinction between the extremes of the manipulations and so forth. At the top end, you may sort of be an early mover here and be the one who actually publishes something seminal, right? That takes those crude early attempts from Davidsson and others of the old guard and really take it to a new level, using new theoretical angles, using new kinds of data, using new kinds of analysis methods. These are, when it comes to new types of data, new kinds of analysis methods, new approaches, it's often the younger researchers that do that well. You're more set in your ways of conducting your empirical research when you get a bit older. So I think there are great opportunities there. And since it's early days, it should be done with a mix of respect and disrespect for the tools you have at hand, right? So, I mean, this external framework, external labor framework, it gives you some structure and vocabulary, but it isn't yet theory, and maybe we haven't found all the right distinctions and concepts within it yet, right? The same thing with the notion of affordances and so forth. I mean, it can be very useful, but what I find to be the useless application of it is that you see an effect, and therefore you theorize that this effect is because of this affordance, and you just put a name on something. There was early theories like that in psychology with instincts and drives, right? So you see a behavior, then you postulate an instinct or a drive that explains that behavior. That's no explanation at all, right? You need to need to do better than that. But I think there are very interesting opportunities to do something really meaningful in this space, because there is a lot that hasn't been done. Another publication in this stream that I have was a sort of call to arms in Academy of Management Discoveries. And I did a little check to see that this is not just my bias. I checked the last 100 hypotheses in SMJ and in JBV at that time. And out of 200 hypotheses, there was there was very few that were about the environment, right? And when they were about the environment, they were typically stable characteristics of the environment, and they were typically a moderator. So this stable characteristics of the environment tweaks the fundamental force of the agent, right? And I don't think that represents the influence of new digital technologies or the influence of COVID, for example. That it is quite clearly the external change that is the dominant force, and can be a little bit happenstance which particular agent it is that leverages it. And there was one hypothesis among the 200 that was about an environmental change, and that was a change in visa laws that was ascribed a direct effect on something. So it was a very small empirical test, but it really confirmed that it is severely under researched, I think, and especially this. When we have a lot of good agent theories, and some of those agent theories are related to dealing with external change. So I mean, absorptive capacity, dynamic capabilities, and individual level theories of attention and creativity and regulatory focus and things like that. But you don't match that to variance in the external change that usually. So I think we can improve those agent theories as well by matching them to variance in the environmental change that you're dealing with and trying to leverage. Okay. It is a very broad question, and it pinpoints something that is important in a maturing field, right? That it becomes increasingly impossible for a, a a single paper or a single dissertation to take a very broad perspective, right? And so we take smaller research questions, and more often collaborate in teams in order to cover all the bases you need for getting to the frontier, even in that little corner. Yet we need to step back as well and put these things in the broader perspective, right? And uh, it was a luxury I enjoyed when I first entered, that you could take on those really big questions. I mean, my research question in my dissertation was, why is it that it was small firm growth, right? So why is it that some small firm continue to grow and develop, but while many sort of stagnate and develop at a certain, and that meant looking at this from an economics perspective, a sociological perspective, business and psychological and all that, the whole lot. You could cover it, right? And you could ask that big question rather than how does this person factor moderate an already uh, known relationship, right? So, and it would take quite an exceptional individual to, without a prior research track record, to both do something meaningful with that bigger question and be taken seriously about it, right? So even if it is well done, there's still a risk that it becomes ignored, right? Until 30 years later, when this person has become someone and someone rediscovers this. So it's a very uh, risky way to go, to put too many eggs in this bigger basket. But I think uh, this area we've been talking about there is one that allows you to take relatively big chunks, um, and you can also be strategic about it. So sort of have different baskets and put some eggs here and there, right? So Dean Shepherd. A bit of a breakthrough for Dean Shepherd was when he published in AMR the paper on grief, sort of failure and grief, right? And which was triggered about events with his father's family business. Um, and I think he didn't have tenure at the time, and he was advised against having this side project, right? But it was something he was passionate about, and he got it into AMR. Was the first to link the general grief literature to the grief of losing a business. So I mean, if you have a passion like that, and you see a gap, I mean that's what I saw when I started out. That sort of, the back to small firm growth now, right? So okay, all the theories seem to assume that the willingness to grow larger is taken for granted, and you only need to know so many small business people to realize that this isn't necessarily the case. So there's something missing here, right? When I had that thought, I said, oh, well, this must be done to death already, but it wasn't. Uh, so if you find something like that you feel this is obviously of some importance and I care about it, then at least maybe you can have a significant side project on that, and maybe that I mean, maybe that amounts to nothing in the end, but maybe it also is the one that really makes a difference compared to your more safer bets, right?